The faint hum of the television filled the room, the static glow casting long, flickering shadows across the wooden walls of the ranger station. I leaned back in the creaky chair, my boots propped on the desk, a half-empty mug of coffee cooling beside me. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the windows in their frames, and for a moment I thought I heard something else. Something faint, like a whisper carried on the gust, but it was probably just the wind. It always sounded worse this deep in the forest. On the screen, the local news anchor droned on. I wasn't really paying attention, not until the words "unexplained disappearances" cut through the haze of my thoughts. I sat up, staring at the screen. A map of the surrounding towns appeared, red dots marking locations. Another missing person reported in the town of Miller's Creek earlier this week, the anchor said. Authorities have yet to find any leads, and residents are growing increasingly concerned. This marks the 5th disappearance in the past 2 months. The wind slammed against the station again, harder this time, making the windows shudder. I glanced toward the darkened panes, my reflection faint and distorted in the glass. Unease prickled at the back of my neck. It wasn't unusual to feel isolated out here. Hell, that was half the job. But tonight, the quiet felt heavier, like the forest itself was holding its breath. Then, a knock. Loud, sharp, echoing through the station. I froze. My hand hovered over the mug, my pulse quickening. Rangers didn't knock. If someone needed me, they'd radio in or just walk through the damn door. The knock came again. Harder, this time, more insistent. I stood, the chair scraping loudly against the floor, and reached for the flashlight on the desk. My heart thudded in my chest as I moved toward the door. "Who's there?" I called, my voice steady despite the unease crawling up my spine. No answer. Just the wind outside hissing and moaning like it was alive. I leaned close to the door, peering through the peephole. A family stood on the porch, a man, a woman, and a teenage girl. The man's face was pale, his sandy blonde hair disheveled, and he was pounding on the door with the side of his fist. The woman clung to his arm, her dark hair whipping around her face in the wind, and the girl stood slightly behind them, her wide eyes darting nervously into the trees. "Please!" the man shouted, his voice muffled through the door. "Someone's following us. We need help." I hesitated, my hand on the lock. My gut told me to be cautious, but the fear in his voice was real. I glanced back at the room, at the shotgun mounted on the wall behind the desk. I could grab it if I needed to. "All right," I said finally, unlocking the deadbolt. The door creaked as I pulled it open, the cold wind rushing in and biting at my face. The man stepped forward, his hazel eyes wide and pleading. "Thank God, please let us in. We've been running for miles. He's out there. He's still out there." "Who?" I asked, scanning the tree line beyond them. Shadows shifted in the swaying branches, but I didn't see anyone or anything. "We don't know," the woman said, her voice trembling. "He's been following us since the highway. He won't stop." The girl didn't say a word, but her gaze was fixed on the darkness behind them, her hands clutching the hem of her hoodie. "Get inside," I said, stepping aside to let them in. The man ushered his family through the door, and I shut it quickly, locking it behind them. The door slammed shut behind them, the lock clicking into place under my hand. I lingered there for a moment, my palm pressed against the cold metal bolt, staring out through the narrow pane of glass at the parking lot beyond. The wind whipped through the trees, rattling the station's old windows, but the lot itself was still. Too still. The only thing out of place was a car I didn't recognize, parked under the sputtering glow of the station's single light. Its shadow stretched, long and jagged across the cracked asphalt, flickering with every stutter of the bulb. Jesus. Oh God. The man, Evan I'd later learn, gasped behind me, doubling over with his hands braced on his knees. His breath came in sharp, ragged bursts, and his face was pale, glistening with sweat despite the cold. I turned to face them. The woman, Laura, was clutching his arm, her knuckles white, her dark hair plastered to her face from the wind. The girl, Abby, stood a few steps back, her eyes wide and unblinking. She didn't look at me. She didn't look at her parents. Her gaze was fixed on the door, as if expecting it to fly open at any second. "What happened?" I asked, my voice low but firm, cutting through the tense silence. Evan straightened, his chest still heaving. We were camping," he began, his words tumbling out in a rush, "out by the North Ridge Trail. It was supposed to be a quick trip, just one night. Everything was fine until..." He trailed off, his hazel eyes darting toward the door. "Until what?" I prompted, my grip tightening on the flashlight in my hand. "There was a man," Laura said, her voice trembling. She glanced at Evan, then back at me, her green eyes wide with fear. "He just showed up, out of nowhere. He didn't say anything. He just stood there at the edge of the firelight." Evan nodded, swallowing hard. "He was wearing this hooded jacket, filthy, torn. We couldn't see his face, not really, but he had this grin. It was wrong, too wide. And his teeth..." He broke off, shaking his head as if the memory itself was too much to bear. "He had a knife," Laura added, her voice barely above a whisper. "A big one. The blade caught the firelight. He didn't run at us, didn't yell. He just started walking toward us. We didn't wait to see what he wanted," Evan said, his tone hardening. "We grabbed what we could and ran. Got in the car and just drove. Didn't even pack up the tent." "Smart," I muttered, though the word felt hollow in the face of what they'd just described. My eyes flicked to Abby. She hadn't said a word, hadn't moved, but her hands were twisting in the hem of her hoodie, her knuckles as pale as her mother's. "How long ago was this?" I asked, my gaze shifting back to Evan. "An hour, maybe less," he said. "We didn't stop until we got here." I nodded, my mind racing. The North Ridge Trail was a good 10 miles from the station, remote, even by park standards. Whoever this guy was, he'd had plenty of time to follow them. If he was out there, he could be close. Too close. I moved to the desk and grabbed the shotgun mounted on the wall. "You're safe here," I said, turning back to them. "Lock the door behind me and don't open it for anyone. Not until I get back." "What?" Laura's voice rose, panic creeping into her tone. "You're going out there? Alone?" "I'll be careful," I said, slinging the shotgun over my shoulder. "But if he's out there, I need to know. I can't just sit here and wait for him to come knocking." "Please," she said, stepping forward, her hand reaching out as if to stop me. "You don't understand. He's not normal." I met her gaze, her green eyes pleading, desperate. "I'll be careful," I repeated, softer this time. "I promise." Evan placed a hand on her shoulder, pulling her back. "Let him do his job, Laura," he said, though his voice wavered. I nodded to him, then glanced at Abby. She still hadn't moved, hadn't spoken, but her eyes finally met mine. There was something in them, something I couldn't quite place. Fear, yes, but also something else, something sharper. I turned back to the door and unlocked it. The cold night air rushed in as I stepped outside. My breath fogged in the air, the wind biting at my face as I scanned the lot. The family's car sat under the sputtering glow of the station's single light, Its shadow stretched long and jagged across the cracked asphalt, flickering with every stutter of the bulb. I stopped a few feet away, sweeping the flashlight over the vehicle. The windows were fogged slightly, but otherwise it seemed untouched. Still, my gut twisted. Something about the way the car sat there felt wrong. I stepped closer, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the dark as I angled it toward the driver's side window. The interior came into focus. Scattered belongings, an open map crumpled on the passenger seat, a half-empty water bottle rolling lazily on the floor. Nothing unusual. My breath fogged against the glass as I leaned in, the shotgun shifting slightly on my shoulder. Then I turned the light toward the back seat. At first, I didn't register what I was seeing. The beam of light caught on something small. I blinked, leaning closer, the flashlight trembling slightly in my grip. There, propped up on the seat, was a doll. No, not a doll. A thing. It was made of sticks, its limbs twisted and bound together with frayed twine. The head was a misshapen knot of wood, and embedded in its center, gleaming faintly in the flashlight's beam, was a human tooth. Yellowed and cracked, it jutted out at an angle. My stomach churned, a wave of nausea rising as I stared at it. The craftsmanship was disturbingly precise. The twine pulled taut, the sticks arranged with almost ritualistic care. It wasn't something you'd stumble upon by accident. Someone had made this. Someone had placed it here. I swallowed hard, the cold air burning in my throat, and leaned in closer, the flashlight shaking as I moved. The tooth caught the light again, its surface dull and pitted with age. I could see the faint grooves where it had once been rooted in a gum line. My pulse quickened, and a cold sweat broke out along the back of my neck. I pulled back abruptly, the flashlight jerking in my hand. My eyes darted to the surrounding forest, the trees pressing in like a wall of impenetrable darkness. The wind had picked up again, rustling the branches and sending a shiver down my spine. I felt exposed, like a target standing in the open. I turned, scanning the lot, the shotgun now gripped tightly in my other hand. Nothing moved, no shadows shifted. But the feeling wouldn't leave, the sense that someone, somewhere, was watching. Gathering my resolve, I turned back toward the woods. The trailhead was ahead, barely visible beyond the reach of the parking lot's light. My boots crunched against the gravel as I approached, the sound swallowed quickly by the dense trees, moving in the wind. I switched the flashlight to my left hand, keeping the shotgun steady in my right. The forest was dense, the trees packed so tightly together that the beam of my flashlight barely penetrated the darkness. Every step felt like a gamble, the underbrush crunching underfoot, the occasional snap of a twig making me flinch. The cold air seemed thicker here, heavier, carrying with it the faint, earthy scent of damp leaves and rotting wood. I moved slowly, my eyes darting between the trail ahead and the shadows at its edges. Every rustle of leaves, every creak of branches, sent a jolt through my chest. Minutes passed, each one dragging on like an eternity. The silence pressed against my ears, broken only by the occasional gust of wind or the distant cry of some nocturnal bird. I kept moving, the flashlight sweeping back and forth, the beam catching on the gnarled roots and twisted branches that lined the trail. Then, movement. I froze, the flashlight jerking to a halt as the beam landed on something ahead. A figure crouched on the trail, its shape barely distinguishable from the surrounding shadows. My heart slammed against my ribs, the shotgun rising instinctively. "Show yourself," I barked. The figure didn't move, didn't react. It just stayed there, hunched over, like some creepy statue carved from the darkness itself. "I said, show yourself," I shouted again, my voice harder this time, the words echoing faintly in the trees. My finger hovered over the trigger, my breath coming in short, sharp bursts. The flashlight's beam wavered slightly, catching on the edges of the figure's silhouette. It moved. The figure rose slowly from the crouch, each movement deliberate, as though savoring the moment. My flashlight beam trembled in my grip, catching on the edges of his silhouette as he straightened to his full height. The hood of his jacket hung low over his face, casting shadows that made it hard to see his features clearly. But then he tilted his head just enough, and I saw it. The grin, wide, grotesque, teeth rotted and smeared with something dark. Blood, maybe. My stomach twisted at the sight of it, his lips stretched far too wide, the grin too unnatural to belong to any sane man. He held a sharpened stick in one hand, its jagged tip glinting faintly in the beam of my flashlight. His posture was calm, unnervingly calm, like he had all the time in the world. "Drop the weapon," I barked, my voice cutting through the suffocating silence. The shotgun was braced against my shoulder, my finger hovering over the trigger. I said, "Drop it." He didn't move, didn't flinch. The grin stayed plastered on his face, and for a moment I thought he hadn't heard me. Then he tilted his head to the side, the motion slow and almost curious, like he was studying me. And then he laughed. It started low, a guttural sound that bubbled up from deep in his chest. The laugh grew louder, rasping and broken like the sound of dry leaves scraping against each other. It wasn't the laugh of a man. It was something else entirely. Something wrong. The sound sent a shiver down my spine, and I tightened my grip on the shotgun. "I said drop it!" I shouted again, louder this time, trying to drown out that horrible sound. My voice wavered, the unease creeping into my tone despite my best efforts to keep it steady. The man didn't stop laughing. He took a step forward instead, his bare feet crunching against the trail. The grin stretched wider, impossibly wide, splitting his face like a mask. "Stop!" I yelled, my finger tightening on the trigger. He kept moving toward me, his stick held loosely at his side. I had no choice. The shotgun roared, the sound deafening in the stillness of the forest. The recoil slammed into my shoulder, and the beam of my flashlight jerked wildly. The man stumbled back, clutching his chest, and for a moment I thought it was over. But then he began to convulse. His body jerked and twisted unnaturally, his limbs moving in ways that no human body should. His head snapped back, the hood falling away to reveal sunken features and hollow eyes that stared into nothing. His mouth opened wide, the grin still there, frozen in place even as his body writhed, and then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. His body dissolved, no, vanished right before my eyes. One moment he was there, a twisted, convulsing figure, and the next he was gone. Smoke. That's what it looked like, his body unraveling into wisps of dark smoke that swirled for a moment before disappearing into the cold night air. I stood frozen, the shotgun still braced against my shoulder, my breath coming in ragged gasps. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. It wasn't possible. None of it was possible. I lowered the shotgun, my hands trembling. The silence pressed in again, heavier than before, broken only by the faint rustling of the wind in the trees. My eyes darted to the ground where the man was just moments ago. The sharpened stick was gone, but something else caught the light. I stepped closer, the beam of the flashlight steadying as I focused on it. A knife. Its blade was long and curved, the surface stained with something dark and sticky. Blood. I crouched down, my fingers hesitant as I reached for the handle. I straightened, holding the knife in one hand and the flashlight in the other. My gaze swept the trail ahead, the shadows darker and deeper than ever. Nothing moved, no sound, but the feeling remained. the feeling like I was being watched. I turned and started back toward the station. When I reached the edge of the parking lot, the station's light flickered weakly in the distance. I reached the door to the station and paused, glancing over my shoulder one last time. The door clicked shut behind me. I twisted the lock, the bolt sliding into place with a metallic thunk, and leaned against the door for a moment, letting the cold air still clinging to my jacket seep into my skin. My chest heaved with each breath, and my fingers trembled as I set the knife down on the desk. Evan and Laura sat huddled together on the worn couch, their faces pale and drawn. Laura's arms were wrapped tightly around herself, her jacket bunched at her elbows, while Evan sat forward, his hands clasped together so tightly that his knuckles were white. Abby was by the window, her small frame silhouetted against the glass. She didn't turn to look at me. Her wide eyes were fixed on the darkness outside, unblinking as though she was waiting for something, or someone, to emerge from the trees. What happened out there? Evan's voice broke the silence. He stood, his eyes locked on me, searching for answers. Did you see him? I exhaled slowly, running a hand through my hair. I saw him, I said. Or something. I don't even know how to explain it. Laura's head snapped up. What do you mean? What did he do? I walked toward the desk, dragging the chair out with a scrape and sinking into it. The knife sat between us. My hand hovered near it before I pulled back, unwilling to touch it again. He was out there, I began, my voice steadying as I forced myself to tell what I'd seen. Standing in the middle of the trail, I told him to stop, to drop whatever he was holding. He didn't listen, just kept coming closer. Evan took a step forward, his gaze darting to the knife. That was his, wasn't it? He asked, his voice tight. The knife. He had it at the campsite. I nodded. Yeah, it's the same one. I shot him. Point blank. He went down, but then my mind wandered, the memory of the man's convulsing body and that awful grin flashing in my mind. I swallowed hard. He didn't die. He just disappeared. Like smoke. Disappeared, Laura echoed, her voice trembling. What do you mean, disappeared? I mean exactly that, I said. I rubbed at my temples, trying to steady myself. 1 second he was there, and the next he wasn't. There was nothing left, just smoke. Like he wasn't even real. That's not possible, Evan muttered, shaking his head. His hands dropped to his sides, his fingers twitching slightly. That doesn't make any sense. None of this makes sense. I snapped, the frustration boiling over. But it happened. I saw it with my own eyes. The room fell silent. Laura reached for Evan's arm, her fingers gripping him tightly. Abby still hadn't moved, her gaze fixed on the window. I turned to the radio on the desk, my hand hovering over the receiver. I'm calling the sheriff, I said, more to myself than anyone else. My voice felt distant, detached, like I was hearing it from somewhere outside my own head. They need to know what's going on. Evan didn't argue. He just nodded, his shoulders slumping as he sank back onto the couch. Laura leaned into him, her face buried against his shoulder, and he wrapped an arm around her. The receiver felt heavy in my hand as I lifted it. I quickly punched in the number for the sheriff's office, and the line rang twice before a voice crackled through the static. Sheriff's office. A gruff voice answered. This is Connor Hayes out at the ranger station, I said, my voice shaking slightly. I've got a situation here. A family showed up, said they were being followed. I went out to check, and I hesitated, the words catching in my throat. You're going to think I'm crazy, but there's something out here. A man. Or something that looks like a man. There was a pause on the other end of the line, the static filling the silence. What do you mean? Something that looks like a man, the sheriff asked, his tone skeptical. I gritted my teeth. I don't know how else to explain it. He was out there, and when I confronted him, he vanished. Like smoke. I've got the knife he was carrying. It's covered in blood. Another pause, longer this time. All right, the sheriff said finally, his voice cautious. I'll send a couple of deputies out to take a look. Sit tight. The line went dead, and I set the receiver down, my hand lingering on it for a moment before I pulled away. They're sending deputies, I said, turning back to the family. Laura nodded weakly, while Evan just stared at the knife on the desk. Abby didn't react at all. It wasn't long before the sound of tires crunching over gravel reached us. The headlights of the sheriff's cruiser cut through the darkness, their beams sweeping across the trees. 2 deputies stepped out, their flashlights slicing through the night as they approached the station. I opened the door and let them in. I explained everything again, my voice steadier this time but no less strained. The deputies exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of skepticism and unease. They didn't say much, just nodded and headed back outside to search the area. The minutes dragged on. As they searched, the silence inside the station was broken only by the occasional murmur of the deputies' voices outside. When they returned, their faces were grim. We found the blood trail, one of them said, his flashlight dangling from his hand. It just stops. No footprints leading away. Nothing. The sheriff arrived not long after. His demeanor was calm, but his eyes were sharp as he questioned the family. He didn't dismiss their story outright, but I could see the doubt in his expression, the way his gaze lingered on the knife and the crude doll I'd brought inside. Eventually, he decided to take the Carters with him for further questioning, promising to keep them safe. Laura hesitated, her eyes darting to me as though seeking reassurance, but Evan guided her toward the door. Abby followed silently, her hands stuffed into the pockets of her hoodie. When the door closed behind them, the station felt impossibly quiet. I stood there for a moment, staring at the empty room before sinking back into my chair. The doll sat on the desk, its twisted limbs and the tooth catching the faint glow of the desk lamp. I couldn't bring myself to touch it, but I couldn't look away either. The television hummed to life as I turned it on. The news anchor's voice droned in the background, but I wasn't listening. My mind replayed the night's events on an endless loop. The hooded man, the grin, the way he'd vanished into nothing. The hours dragged on as I sat slumped in the chair, the shotgun resting against my leg, my fingers idly tracing the rough edge of the stock. The television muttered softly in the background. I wasn't watching it. Couldn't focus on anything after what had happened. My eyelids felt heavy, my body aching with exhaustion. But every time my head nodded forward, my nerves jolted me awake. I rubbed my eyes and glanced at the clock on the wall. Nearly 3 a.m. The sheriff and his deputies had left hours ago, taking the Carters with them. I glanced at the doll still sitting on the desk where I'd left it. I hadn't touched it since bringing it inside. Just looking at it made my stomach churn. I leaned back in the chair, trying to shake off the creeping fog of sleep. My mind wandered back to the trail, to the hooded man and that awful, impossible grin. I'd shot him, point blank. I'd seen him collapse, seen his body dissolve into smoke. And yet, the feeling of being watched hadn't left me since. The television flickered, the static crackling faintly before the picture steadied again. I stared at it without really seeing, my thoughts spiraling deeper into the night's events. My grip tightened on the shotgun. I couldn't shake the sense that something, or someone, was still out there. Then I heard it. A faint tapping sound, barely audible over the low drone of the television. My breath caught in my throat, and I sat up straight, my heart thudding against my ribs. The sound came again, sharper this time. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from outside. I grabbed the shotgun, my pulse quickening as I rose to my feet. The tapping continued, steady and deliberate, like someone, or something, was trying to get my attention. I turned toward the window, every nerve in my body on edge. The room felt colder now, the air heavy with a tension I couldn't explain. I moved slowly, the floorboards creaking under my boots as I approached the window. The tapping stopped for a moment, replaced by the faint rustling of the wind outside. I reached the window and peered out, the shotgun held tightly in my hands. At first I saw nothing. The parking lot was empty, the lone streetlight casting its sputtering glow across the cracked asphalt. I scanned the tree line, my eyes straining against the shadows. And then I saw him. He stood just beyond the reach of the station's lights, his figure barely visible against the darkness. The hood of his filthy jacket obscured most of his face, but the grin was unmistakable. My breath stopped, and I stumbled back from the window, my mind reeling. It wasn't possible. I'd shot him. I'd seen him vanish. He couldn't be here. And yet there he was, standing as still as a statue, his head tilted slightly as though he were watching me. My grip on the shotgun tightened, though my palms were slick with sweat. The tapping started again. This time it was louder. It wasn't coming from the window. It was coming from the front door. I turned and took a step toward the door. The tapping continued, each one sending a jolt through my already frayed nerves. I raised the shotgun, the barrel trembling slightly as I moved closer. Then the sound stopped as suddenly as it had started. I stared at the door, waiting for something, anything, to happen. But there was nothing. Slowly, I reached out with one hand and unlocked the bolt. The metallic click was too loud in the quiet room, and I froze, listening for any sign of movement outside. Nothing. My fingers curled around the doorknob, and I twisted it slowly, the hinges creaking softly as I pulled the door open. The cold night air rushed in, biting at my face and sending a shiver down my spine. The porch was empty. No figure. No sound. Just the faint rustle of the wind and the distant creak of the trees. And then I saw it. Sitting on the doorstep right in front of me, illuminated by the weak glow of the station's light, was another doll. Identical to the one on my desk. Its stick limbs were twisted and bound with the same frayed twine. Its wooden head tilted slightly to the side, and embedded in its center was another human tooth. My stomach turned and I stepped back, the shotgun still raised. The doll sat there, its presence somehow more menacing than if someone had been standing there instead. I swallowed hard, but my throat was dry, and glanced around the lot, searching for any sign of movement. Nothing. Just the doll. I closed the door quickly, locking the bolt and leaning against the cold metal. My chest heaved with each breath, my mind racing. My gaze flicked between the doll sitting on the desk and the door, my thoughts spiraling into a chaotic mess of fear and confusion. I didn't know how much more of this I could take. I couldn't leave it out there, not where it could do whatever it was meant to do. Very slowly, I peeked out the window, but there was still nothing, just the creepy doll sitting there on the doorstep. I took one final deep breath, unlocked the deadbolt, and stepped outside. I bent down slowly, my shotgun still clutched tightly in one hand, and plucked the doll from the doorstep. My fingers tingled as I gripped it, and I fought the urge to throw it as far away from me as possible. Instead, I stepped back inside, closing the door firmly behind me. and sliding the bolt into place. The first doll still sat on the desk where I'd left it. I set the second doll down beside it, and for a moment, the room felt unnaturally still. The two seemed to stare at me, their crude, stick-limbed bodies radiating something I couldn't name. Malevolence. That was the only word that came to mind. The air around them felt charged, like the moments before a lightning strike. My chest tightened, and I realized I was holding my breath. I couldn't do this anymore. I couldn't just sit here and let these things, whatever they were, linger. They didn't belong here. They didn't belong anywhere. My jaw clenched as a surge of determination cut through the fear. I had to end this. Now. I crossed the room quickly, my boots thudding against the worn floorboards, and grabbed the metal trash can from the corner. I brought it back to the desk, setting it down with a hollow clang. My hands shook as I picked up the first doll and dropped it into the can. Then I grabbed the second, repeating the motion. I grabbed the box of matches from the desk drawer, my fingers fumbling as I struck one against the side. The flame flared to life, and I held it over the dolls for a moment, hesitating. But I forced myself to drop the match. The fire caught quickly, the dry twine and brittle sticks igniting with a sharp crackle. The flames licked hungrily at the dolls, consuming them immediately. The air filled with the smell of burning wood and something else. Something foul, like rotting meat. I stepped back, my shotgun still in hand, and watched as the dolls were reduced to blackened shapes. And then I heard it. The laughter. It was faint at first, barely audible over the crackling flames, but it grew louder, more distinct, a low sound that sent a chill racing down my spine. My grip on the shotgun tightened as I scanned the room, my eyes darting to every shadow, every corner. The laughter didn't stop. It echoed through the station, bouncing off the walls and ceiling surrounding me. It wasn't human. It couldn't be human. "Who's there?" I barked, my voice shaking despite my best efforts to steady it. The laughter only grew louder, as if mocking me. I turned in a slow circle, the shotgun raised and ready. The room felt colder now, the temperature dropping so quickly that my breath came out in visible puffs. My fingers ached from the chill, but I didn't dare lower the weapon. The lights flickered suddenly, the dim glow of the overhead bulb stuttering in and out. The shadows in the room seemed to shift and stretch with each flicker. The laughter was everywhere now, filling the space, pressing against me like a physical force. My chest tightened and I struggled to breathe, the air feeling thick and heavy. And then I felt it. A presence behind me. Every muscle in my body tensed as the sensation washed over me like icy fingers trailing down my spine. I spun around, the shotgun braced against my shoulder and my finger hovering over the trigger. But there was nothing. The room was empty. And the laughter stopped. The silence that followed was eerie. My legs felt weak and I stumbled back, the shotgun lowering slightly as my arms trembled. My knees hit the edge of the chair, and I collapsed into it. My hands shook violently as I set the shotgun across my lap, my fingers curling tightly around the stock. The room was still cold, with the lingering stench of smoke and something darker, something I couldn't name. My eyes darted to the trash can. The fire had burned out, leaving only a pile of blackened ash at the bottom. But the feeling remained. Whatever I was dealing with, it wasn't just a man. It wasn't something I could fight with a shotgun or burn away with fire. It was something far worse. The hours dragged on, each minute stretching into eternity. The station was silent except for the television, and the occasional creak of the walls as the wind whipped against them. My eyes darted to every corner of the room, every shadow, every slight movement outside the window. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The laughter still played in my mind, and I couldn't let it go. Every creak of the floorboards and every sound of the wind outside made my heart jump. My body was exhausted, my muscles stiff and aching, but I didn't dare let my guard down. Not after everything I'd seen. I glanced at the clock. It was nearly 6 a.m. Dawn was close. I just had to make it through the night. Then this would all be over, I hoped. My fingers brushed against the stock of the shotgun, tracing its rough edges as I tried to ground myself. And then finally the first rays of sunlight began to seep through the windows. It was faint at first, a pale golden glow that barely touched the edges of the room. But as the minutes passed, the light grew stronger, pushing back the darkness that had clung to the station all night. The weight in the air began to lift, and for the first time in hours, I felt like I could breathe again. The warmth of the sun on my face was a small comfort, but it wasn't enough to erase the feeling that had settled deep in my chest. I stood, the shotgun still in my hands, and walked to the window. The forest outside was bathed in soft morning light, the trees casting long shadows across the ground. Everything looked normal, peaceful even, but I knew better than to trust appearances. The hooded man, whatever he was, had vanished before. He could be out there now, watching and waiting. The next few days passed without any incidents, and I thought that maybe it was all over. I had managed to put myself at ease as best I could, but something still lingered in the back of my mind every night as I looked out into the forest. Then a call from the sheriff shattered what little peace I'd managed to find. "The family," he said, his voice heavy with something I couldn't quite place. "The Carters. They're gone." "What do you mean, gone?" I asked, my stomach twisting. "Their car was found abandoned on the side of the highway," he said. "No sign of them. It's like they just vanished." I didn't respond. I couldn't. The words caught in my throat. They were gone, and I knew deep down that the hooded man, or whatever he was, had something to do with it. I couldn't stay here, not after everything that had happened. The forest, the station, even the air itself felt tainted, as though the hooded man's presence had seeped into every corner of this place. I put in a request to transfer to a different park, far from here. Somewhere I could start over, somewhere I could feel safe again. Packing my belongings was a slow process. I moved through the station like a ghost while my mind was elsewhere. The shotgun was the last thing I packed, just in case I needed it. I closed the lid and reached for my duffel bag, but something stopped me. A small, crude doll was tucked into the corner of the bag. Its stick limbs were bound with frayed twine, its wooden head tilted slightly to the side. And its grin was unmistakable. My breath caught in my throat, and I stumbled back, my legs hitting the edge of the desk. The room seemed to tilt around me, the walls closing in as I stared at the doll. It hadn't been there before. I was sure of it. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. It wasn't over. It would never be over. The doll's grin seemed to widen as I stared at it, a chilling reminder that whatever this thing was, it wasn't done with me yet.